Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome today's program, John Richardson, who's Vice President of Supply Chain Analytics at Transportation Insight. And today we're going to talk about preparing your data for AI, blockchain, and other emerging technology applications. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that companies often make is that they go right after, these shiny new technology applications without first clearly defining the business problem or opportunity that they want to go after, and without first getting their data in order. So why is it that companies still struggle with data quality management? How do you get over the change management hurdles? And what are some best practices to getting the most value from emerging technologies? Well, those are going to be the key questions we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to have John on the program to share his insights and advice on this topic. So John, welcome to the program.
Well, appreciate being here today.
Well, John, you're a first-time guest on Talking Logistics. So before we kind of dive into this very timely and important topic, I always like to kind of get a sense of, how and why people got involved in this crazy industry that we're in to begin with. So why don't you briefly tell us a little bit about your career path, again, how and why you got into supply chain logistics, and what your current role and responsibilities are there at Transportation Insight?
Sure. I kind of like to say I fell into logistics and have never been able to get myself out. Actually, I started with an internship at the J.B. Hunt terminal in Memphis when I was working on my master's. And by the end of that summer, I'd gotten hired on to the corporate office up in Lowell as a logistics engineer, supporting new business development, doing transportation routing, et cetera. Left J.B. Hunt Logistics and went to Walmart doing strategic distribution design. That's where I really got introduced to the strategy of it all. Then got into supply chain consulting, doing everything from inventory optimization to network design, just kind of, you name it, I was crunching those numbers. Did that as an independent and also for a firm. Then I joined Transportation Insight about 8 years ago, really to build out a more robust analytics offering for our clients with more of a consulting bent to help them strategically with their networks.
Well, that's a great journey. I mean, you can't do any better than, J.B. Hunt, Walmart, and, now Transportation Insight. I mean, those are, certainly great opportunities, from different perspectives of what's happening in the world of supply chain and logistics. And I always tell folks that I fell into, this industry as well. I mean, my background being in a material science engineer. So how do you go from material science engineering and working in semiconductors to now for 20 plus years doing this in supply chain? It's kind of an interesting journey as well. But once you fall into it, it's very difficult to get out.
And can't get out.
Exactly. It's because for a lot of good, positive reasons, of course. All right, so let's get into this topic now. Like I said in my opening, comments, there's a lot of conversation, a lot of focus on a lot of these emerging technologies, AI, machine learning, blockchain, and the like. But despite all these advancements that we're seeing on those types of technology and technology applications, many companies still struggle with really what's foundational to make these things, to get the most value from these technologies, which is data quality. So why, that's the basic question, why do companies still struggle with data quality management?
Yeah, I think in general, it's because they don't have incentives and measurements around the data quality. And you look at where data gets captured within a company, more than likely the people that are keying in the data or however you're capturing it, they're probably incented on productivity and, don't have good reviews on the data checks. And I think they also really don't understand what's the downstream impact. I think about the item master and how many times in an item master you see the length, width, and height is 111. And while that's very good, I bet we don't have that many 1-cube cases. But then you think about what could that drive? That could drive in warehouse space requirements. It could drive how you're going to route a truck. And ultimately, if the ERP is feeding their TMS and they've got the wrong dimensions, they may overfill a truck, and now you're causing a lot of issues on the dock. So I think, it's just people don't really focus on how important it is. I was kind of noticing on one of your articles where you talked about implementing TMS, and of the respondents you had in that survey, only 40% of them said master data was critical to a successful launch. And I think that's why people don't understand everything that it affects.
Yeah, that's a great, two great points there. Number one, and this is something that I've written about as well, which is, who's responsible for data quality management, right? And there's a lot of finger pointing that takes place within an organization when it comes to that. Number two is to your point, a lot of folks just have a very myopic view of, the data and don't understand the upstream and downstream implications of it. So the example you gave of putting in just a 111 for the dimensions, I mean, that comes into play with if all of a sudden you try to do drop shipping on behalf of your retail customers and you've got the wrong dimensions in there, what the products are, that's going to impact, operations. So if you're doing, or if you're taking ownership of your inbound and you're doing pickup and you try to do routing and try to create, figure out how much can you fit in a trailer, but you've got all sorts of wrong dimensions. You go to a supplier to pick a load up and there's no more room in the trailer to fit it in there because all the dimensions have been wrong and all the planning and optimization you did was off of, bad data. So I think those are two great points. And I think one of the key issues, which kind of leads me to my next question is, one of the main hurdles is change management. I mean, that's what we always, hear a lot of, that is, how do you get over that? This is the way we've always done it, syndrome. I mean, any recommendations or advice on how to get over that hurdle?
I think, at our core, people don't like change. I think, when you come in and you say to somebody, we need to change what you're doing, they take it kind of as ooh, I didn't do my job right or something. And so I think we have to make change non-threatening and incremental. There's a concept of rewarding failure. Sometimes when you get into change, people are scared that they're going to fail, but hey, that's okay. You got to try new things or, we're not going to be different. From my consulting days, I was always amazed when I'd go in and interview clients and on these projects, and I'd ask, well, what do you think the results should be? What do you think we should do? And probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, they knew exactly what needed to happen. But whatever it is about our business culture, it's like you have to bring in a third party and have them say it, for it to stick. And sometimes it really takes people coming in and I'll say asking the stupid questions, the things that in a company you just take for granted because that's always done it. And so you have to ask somebody, well, why are you doing it that way? I heard a story, I have no idea if this is true or not, but of at a tire manufacturer, they'd invested in a new wrapping machine for the tires. And they were going to save all this productivity and money. And as they were rolling it out, somebody on the tour said, why are we wrapping tires? And nobody really had a good answer. And so they researched and they found out it was to protect the white walls. So, which they didn't make anymore. So I think it's just, too often we're not incented to challenge the status quo. And I think that's why it makes it hard for companies to change.
You said there, this is the second time you really said this, incentivized to challenge the status quo. Earlier, you said, people are really incentivized to think about data quality management. So really, I think one of the key learnings I'm getting from what we're talking right now is that, there's got to be some metrics, some incentives in place where, this is something that becomes part of everybody's responsibility, becomes part of the culture, if you will, to really get this going, right?
Yeah, I'm a big believer. People do exactly what they're incented to do, and people are really creative. So they're going to find a way to maximize, the results that they're incented to do. And so you have to make sure, metrics across a company, that it's balanced, that everybody's being incented to do what the company wants them to do.
Right, absolutely. You know, the story you just told about the tire and wrapping the tires kind of reminded me when I was an engineer, you know, similar type of thing. And this one is even related to data. You know, we would do a lot of statistical process control. And I remember we would just get all of this data. And I remember asking one time, well, why are we measuring the temperature on this particular line? And no one knew why we were measuring, you know, the temperature anymore, because it wasn't really a critical type of thing. And the only thing that we could all figure out was that maybe years ago there must have been some kind of a process problem or quality problem where measuring the temperature became important to solve that problem. And then after that problem was resolved, we just kept measuring it anyway, even though we weren't doing anything with the data anymore. Which again brings me to my next question, which, you know, one of the things I often hear from a lot of supply chain logistics professionals is that, you know, we're drowning in data, right? And right now with IoT coming on the forefront and mobile and everything else, I mean, we arguably have more data at our fingertips than ever before. So how do you determine which data is actually valuable and which one is just, you know, just noise?
Yeah. So I'm going to take a little bit of an engineering answer. I think I like all data. Give me it all. But I think where it really becomes valuable or not is how it's used, and it kind of goes back to my other earlier comment about the metric. You know, you really want to create metrics that are actionable and are going to drive your business. You know, there's a lot of great information that might be nice to have, but if you're not measuring the right things and making it relatable across all aspects of the business, you're going to, going back to the incentives, people are going to do different things for the right reason, the wrong things for the right reasons. You know, I've worked with a lot of CPG companies, and, you know, the plant manager, well, he's incented on the pounds of production, you know, and so his whole world is, how do I just crank this stuff out? Well, and then you get to the warehouse and he's getting measured on cases of inventory and storage and how much he's shipping. Well, you kind of have a conflict right there, because you got one that, hey, I got to maximize this. And the other one, it's like, I've got to minimize this. And so how do you work that out? You know, I had a project where we'd done a network design and rebalanced manufacturing lines across a network. And this one plant manager, we'd taken pounds out of his plant. Well, he had done his own analysis, flew to headquarters to pitch his case about why everything we had done was wrong based on what he was measuring. And it's like, well, we're looking at everything, and this is a good decision. But, you know, to that end, if a company's going to make that kind of decision, they've got to make it, you know, fair to those people that are measured like that, to make it equitable, so you're not penalizing them for something that they didn't do.
Right, right. Well, you know, I think it speaks to kind of the you know, one of the best practices being, you know, having this balanced scorecard, if you will. It really cuts across different functional groups and organizations. But I think, you know, one of the things that I continue to find is that we still have this siloed, you know, mentality, as you mentioned. So I mean, I think, you know, to paraphrase a little bit of what you just talked about, I mean, part of it is, you know, are you measuring the right things? And then, you know, number two is, you know, do you know what your data is telling you? So then you can take, you know, the whatever actions are needed to take to drive continuous improvement. I mean, are there any other questions companies should ask to, you know, in terms of their data, and to make the best use of their data?
I mean, you know, I think, what's the outcome that you want? And you kind of said it. If you have to measure something, if you want to change it, and, you know, what's going to drive that behavior? You know, I've got one client, and they've picked one measurement, and it happens to be manufacturing square feet, because they make quart card corrugate, and they relate everything to that, completely end to end, even to, you know, how many manufacturing square feet did I put on a truck? Well, that is not a normal, you know, transportation metric, but the entire company speaks that language. And so when they talk about things being up or the cost per, they can relate it, you know, across everything. So I think it's, you know, what is that unifying metric across the company that is meaningful?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, one of the other things with data, we haven't really talked about it much yet, but maybe we could touch upon it a little bit, is, the fact that, hey, there's data that's within the four walls, but there's a lot of data that's got to get shared with trading partners and others, because this is, after all, a supply chain, and you have to share data with suppliers and customers. But I think historically there's always been this fear of sharing, data, too much data, or the right data. So there's kind of that trust element. Any thoughts, or what's happening there in terms of trusting the data that you're sharing with other parties?
Yeah, I think we're going to enter a new era with everything that's going on. We're all in this together. And as we think about the COVID-19 recovery, and I was reading an article today that mentioned black holes in your data, in your supply chain. And I think if you're really going to be able to understand your supply chain, be a good partner, and being able to do good risk assessments, you've got to be as transparent as you can. I think, there's that perception that oh, this is all very, very secret, but I think we've got to get beyond that and really be good partners. And I think the real big example that comes to mind for me is a lot in the retail and particularly the grocery industry, the whole prepaid shipments coming in. And, I've been on a lot of projects where we've looked at prepaid to collect conversion, but what makes that so hard is a lot of times the receiver doesn't know where it actually shipped from. And, if we're going to be able to assess risk because of a particular area of the country or geographical region, well, you got to know it's coming from there to know I've got a risk if something occurs over there.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, I think hopefully one of the outcomes from the current crisis that we're in is that it's going to spur some innovation or change management, if you will, moving forward in terms of how to manage supply chain logistics processes, smarter, more efficiently, and more collaboratively, moving forward than we have in the past. Because, these silos that we may have from a data standpoint translate into silos that we have in the processing standpoint. And that just adds friction and inefficiency and cost and so forth, which during normal times, you kind of sometimes get away with, or you put Band-Aids around, or it kind of gets hidden in the balance sheet and P&L, if you will. But in times like these, it's when all that efficiencies and cost and everything else really, bubbles up to the surface and creates, a lot of, challenges. So as a way to kind of, start wrapping up the conversation a little bit here, I mean, what are some, best practices that companies can adopt to, position themselves for success and getting the most value from some of these emerging technologies that we're hearing so much about, AI, blockchain, and so forth?
Yeah, I think you have to instill a culture of data quality at the absolute lowest levels. People have to understand the accountability for correct data and how that data is being used. Because, I think the more you can inform people about the intent of what you're going to do with it, the better off that you are. And if you're really going to maximize the value in the supply chain, you've got to get the data to a place that you don't really question it. I think we do too much data cleanup down the road. I know when we'll do a network design, we'll spend a third of the project just cleaning up the data. And so, when you think about all these emerging technologies, and now you're going to turn all of this interpretation of the data over to a machine, you definitely want to be sure you're giving that machine the best information that you can, because you are losing that little bit of human judgment as you're looking at results.
I love that, because I mean, I think you mentioned, kind of having a culture around, data quality management. And I think that's a key thing here, is to kind of move away from this. You kind of give the example of a project, right? You're doing a network redesign, and you spend a 30th time doing data cleansing. Well, if this had been a continuous business process, if it's part of the culture, right, you don't spend a 30th time cleansing the data because it's been getting cleaned and any issues that get addressed all along the way, right? So I think that's a key thing there. I mean, one of the other things that I've been, I think it's becoming more critically important. I'd love to get your thoughts is, really having this really deep down visibility, right? So there's a lot of conversation around visibility, but I think it's becoming clear that, the deeper and the more nested that visibility is, all the way down to the SKU level and building up from there, that's going to provide that granularity and that richness of data to really get the most value from these, emerging technologies. Do you agree?
No, absolutely. And even as we think about this recovery, companies really have to understand where are their most profitable SKUs, which SKUs do they have the most risk? And as you look at the demand profile, I mean, when we flip out of this, the whole US isn't just going to flip back on, it's going to be regional. And having visibility to those critical customers, those critical SKUs, that's going to turn into a whole, inventory redeployment. You may want to be, shifting around, because the one thing you can definitely say is we're not going to be able to depend on historical patterns. This is going to be all new. And so you're going to have to get down to that granular level to make good decisions.
That's a great point. So John, just as a way to wrap up then, I mean, what advice would you give to senior leadership as it relates to leveraging data and emerging technologies to make smarter business decisions?
So, my biggest advice, it would be around having a good process, having good people that really understand how to manipulate the data so that you don't end up injecting any bias. And where these teams live that are doing this analysis, that are providing guidance, think about it. Ultimately, with a lot of these meetings, you're converting a whole lot of data into a PowerPoint presentation and asking some senior leader to go make a decision. And I've seen too many times with too many companies that these presentations get filtered up through different layers, maybe potential biases. And senior leaders lose some of the nuance and some of the assumptions that went into it. Go back to World War II, and Churchill started the Special Operations Executive to provide independent intelligence about what was happening. And it's not that he felt like the different branches of the military where the intelligence arms lived were going to skew things or, not, or lie to him or whatever, but they all interjected their own biases. So, if there was a particular situation, the Royal Air Force may have, we need to use planes for this. Well, the Navy, no, we need to use ships. And so he wanted that objective view of his data directly. So we had a complete picture, pretty unfiltered.
That's a great example. I think this brings us back full circle to something you said earlier on in the conversation, where you talked about, sometimes it's helpful to have a third party come in and ask those quote unquote stupid questions. Or I like to think of them as, simple questions of why do you do it this way? Or why do you have this over here instead of over there, and so forth, right? That can help uncover, some of the opportunities. And I think that's another value add for an objective third party, is to, be able to have access to that data and be able to, glean insights from it that maybe that as a third party, you might be able to see some things through a more neutral lens, if you will, that perhaps folks within the four walls, because of their biases, because of their limited perspective, may see it differently. So I think that might be another area where obviously having, third parties such as yourselves, part of the process, I think can help. Well, John, this is a very meaty topic. Like I always say at the end of our conversations, we could probably spend hours, talking about this, but I think you provided some great insights and advice on this topic. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate it.
I want to thank those of you that joined us. If you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Transportation Insights website or on Talking Logistics, and you've got a question or a comment for John, you can post it there, and I'm sure he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us, and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.